It's pretty exhilarating to feel that you're at the forefront of new research, isn't it? We are very fortunate today as we're talking about Romaine's, the incredible cultural connections she had with major figures of European life in, from the turn of the 20th century, really up throughout her entire life. And this afternoon, Sylvia Kahan will talk to us more about this. Sylvia is a professor of music at the Graduate Center and College of Staten Island of the City University of New York, where she is a member of not one, but two faculties, both piano and musicology. As a piano, Dr. Kahan has performed as a concerto soloist, a recitalist, and a chamber musician in concert venues throughout North America and Europe. As a musicologist, she specializes in late 19th and 20th century French music and culture. She's also a distinguished writer. She's written on women's roles as music patrons in Paris and New York, on Proust and music, Nadia Boulanger, French opera, and the history of octotonicism. Did I get that right, Sylvia? Yeah. Oh, hey. Her book, Music's Modern Muse, A Life of Winnaretta Singer, ring some bells here, was hailed by the New York Times Literary Supplement as a very important new study. A second book, called In Search of New Scales, Prince Edmond de Polignac, Octotonic Explorer, has just been published by the University of Rochester Press. Sylvia is a regular lecturer on French opera and the New York City Opera. She has served, actually this is very important, as 2 terms as chair of the New York chapter of the American Musicological Society. So we have not only a distinguished art historian who has started us off, we have a distinguished musicologist who is going to bring major new dimensions and understandings to Romaine's context, life, and friends. Sylvia?
I would like you to think of this as a sort of organizing image for my talk. We can see at the turn of the century that we have little push carts and horse-drawn carriages sharing the same road as the new automobile. And the focus of my talk is, we talk about Romaine as an ardent modernist, indefatigable, her own woman. What does this mean to other people in her circles at the time, to be modern? It's a little bit of a paradoxical point of view. Parisians considered themselves to be extremely modern, but as we'll see from the images I present, there's as much backward glancing as forward glancing. We certainly are talking about a time of radical new technologies and scientific discoveries that would change people's lives forever. We think, for example, of the 1900 World's Fair in Paris, which had represented the gleaming vision of modernism, paying homage to the most recent technologies and the newest glories of the machine age. The first radio stations had been established. One could listen to a performance at the opera from one's living room thanks to a nifty little invention called the théâtrophone. You dialed the number of the opera and you got to listen over the receiver. Scientists had just discovered different blood groups. The first line of the chemin de fer métropolitaine, better known affectionately by Paris lovers as the métro, began running trains from Vincennes to Port-Maillot. The first electrified trains began departures from the Gare d'Orsay. The wealthy were buying automobiles, and these imposing vehicles motored down the long boulevards, sharing space with horse-drawn carriages and bicyclists. The result was a strange and delightful mixed rhythm of motion. 2 great exhibition halls, the Grand and Petit Palais, were open to the public. Artistically, Paris seemed to be looking backwards as well as forward. The Art Nouveau You know, this is the great artistic movement of the turn of the century, but compared to Romaine's work, look at how old-fashioned it looks. So, I thought this was very nifty. Let's see if we can get it to go. Oh, it doesn't want to move. Okay, too bad. Nice little film, but it's not working. Okay. Here we have the height of Paris fashion. Right? These are modern women, and yet consider the mechanics of these dresses, the bustles, the underwear, the sheer weight on their heads. Is this modern? It's actually very restrictive. In music, the big events of the new century included, more looking back, the first complete Paris performance of Handel's Messiah, the first Paris performances of Wagner's Tristan and Isolde, sung in French. The role of women in early 20th century French society was still highly circumscribed. While women paraded down the boulevards wearing these chic new gowns, we can think of these undergarments. Repressive laws dating back to the Napoleonic Code allowed very limited means of self-expression outside the home sphere. The antidote to this constriction was the salon. The salon culture is my scholarly specialty. And the fascinating thing about it is that women were really not allowed to excel and advance outside the home sphere. But within the home, they could be very experimental and do a lot of things. So we have this parallel universe, artistically, musically speaking, literary circles as well. Women were encouraged to achieve, to excel, to perform, but it had to be within the sphere of their own home. And so women had to be very creative about what they could do behind the scenes. Now, the salon was not a 20th century invention. It dated back to the Age of Enlightenment, when nobles and intellectuals began to invite scientists, writers, and wits to their home to discuss literature and philosophy, or to converse. For at that time, conversation was considered an art form. After the Revolution of 1848, Parisians continued to assemble, to discuss art, literature, politics, but also to attend balls and parties. And this is a canvas from 1878 by Jean Béraud, and this is typical. People dressed to the nines to go and listen to music, to go and listen to the latest famous writer read portions of his novels. The salons allowed the wealthy hostesses to display their financial and social prestige. Each of these women had a particular day upon which she received. And even after the fall of the Second Republic, the aristocratic salons continued to flourish under the new regime. At the same time, the rising wealthy bourgeois class began to create its own salons in opulent mansions erected in the neighborhoods to the north of the Champs-Élysées. And here is a typical gathering. Now, new to all of these gatherings was the special place accorded to music. In the early 19th century, in the elegant mansion of Napoleon's niece, Princesse Mathilde, or in the more, quote, artistic homes of Marie Dagout or another famous crossdresser, Georges Sand, really a precursor to Romaine Brooks in her defiance of the sartorial and societal roles assigned to women. In these settings, music served as a backdrop to amusing conversation or to literary, philosophical, or political discussions. In the more expansive age of Napoleon III, music became the express object of these meetings, and this practice continued right up until World War II. Since most members of the aristocracy did not work, it was possible to spend entire afternoons and evenings moving from salon to salon, mixing music and conviviality. Every hostess had her day upon which she received. Paris socialites dressed in their finest splendor would be driven down the long boulevards in their carriages, alighting at one or another of the magnificent mansions where they would be treated to a musical program of high quality, performed by a renowned diva or tenor, or an acclaimed virtuoso pianist or violinist. These artists might, on occasion, be accompanied by a full orchestra. These musical feasts were an integral part of an artistic and literary schedule that included attendance at a reading by the newest young author at the offices of Le Figaro, painting in one's own atelier, or an excursion into the countryside to paint en plein air. The schedule included art openings, evenings at the opera, and in pleasant weather, a drive to the Bois de Boulogne, including a stop at the Bois restaurant, the Pré Catalan, to sip a cool lemonade or a glass of cognac. Many matinees and soirees featured the mistress, or sometimes the master, of the house as star performers. Aristocrats might not be gainfully employed, but in the artistic realm, they did not rest idle. The Comtesse de Fontenay sang the original compositions of her husband, who accompanied her on the piano. The Princesse de Béraud hosted a soirée where she sang Spanish songs, accompanied by mandolins, harps, and guitars, all played by her titled friends. While most of these performers were dilettantes, some were true artists. The Comtesse de Guern was one of Gabriel Fauré's favorite interpreters of his music. The Princesse Rachel de Brancovan, mother of Anna de Noailles, whose portrait we saw before, was, despite her extremely nervous disposition, a virtuoso pianist. She would entertain her guests with magnificent performances of Chopin ballades, Paderewski etudes, and Mozart concertos. The pianistic prowess of the Marquise de Saint-Pol, who was equally renowned for her biting tongue, was so formidable that it earned her the nickname Serpent à Sonnette, a pun on serpent à sonnette, rattlesnake. Salon culture was not just limited to the aristocracy. There were highly renowned salons in the haute bourgeoisie, the most prestigious of which were those of Madame Émile Strauss, daughter of opera composer Fromental Halévy, and the widow of an even more celebrated opera composer, Georges Bizet. And Madame Edouard André, who was an important art collector and whose home became the Musée Jacquemart André. Other salons, such as that of the novelist Alphonse Daudet and his wife, were strictly artistic in nature. A beloved salon, where classes mixed easily, was that of Madeleine Lemaire, an amateur painter from the bourgeoisie, particularly well known for her watercolor depictions of flowers. Lemaire presented Saint-Saëns, Massenet, and Fauré at weekly musical gatherings. So now I'm beginning to talk about a salon where it is possible that Romaine was in attendance. When these gatherings took place, the newspapers would come and report and would give a list of the names of all the guests. And Romaine's name appears frequently in many of these salon gatherings. Even more important, a salon hostess was Marguerite Meg Bonis, who became, after her second marriage, Madame de Saint-Marceau. On Friday nights, Meg would open up her house on the Boulevard Malesherbes to, quote, friends coming from work, tired after a full day, neighbors who decided at the last minute to leave their fireside corner to come sit at mine, painters still wearing their smocks. Meg's guests comprised a wide circle of artists, composers, performing musicians, and writers, including those of the avant-garde, such as Claude Debussy and the very young Maurice Ravel. The atmosphere was much more casual than that found in the homes of the aristocracy. The artists would be off in a corner, engaged in a friendly painter's quarrel. Fauré or pianist Edouard Riesler would sit at the piano, playing for no one in particular. Tenor Maurice Bagès would launch into the songs of Schumann with whatever accompanist was available. And opera star Emma Calvé would give a powerful performance of an aria without ever leaving her chair. In the early 20th century, salon culture represented the height of elegance. The salon followed the social calendar. There was a petite saison, a short season, which lasted from Christmas until the middle of Lent, and a grande saison, a long season, quote, from Easter until the Grand Prix, that is to say, from April to July. The growth of salon culture coincided with an inspiring marketing ploy by the newspapers to increase sales by satisfying its readership's insatiable curiosity about the goings-on in high society. To that end, Le Figaro created a special column called Le Monde et la Ville, so Society in the City, and Le Gaulois followed suit with a counterpart called Mondanité, Society News. The columns broke down into categories of mondain activity: social information, clubs, charity events, hunting, vacation spots, marriages, death, and so forth. But by far the greatest amount of newsprint was devoted to the section entitled Salons. The diversions offered by the various hostesses, whether literary, musical, or purely social, were reported in meticulous detail, as were the names of those in attendance. So a reader could track the daily movements of the Duchesse of X or the Vicomte of Y by reading that the lady or gentleman in question had attended the Marquise de Saint-Paul's musical matinee on Monday, an elegant tea at the Princesse Murat's on Tuesday, a dinner followed by a vocal recital in honor of the Queen of Spain on Wednesday, the funeral of the Comte de Ganay on Thursday, and a 5 o'clock reading by a poet followed by a tour de valse hosted by the Comtesse Greffule on Friday. Now, the Comtesse Greffule, any of you that visited Paris within the last year may have seen at the Musée Galleria an exhibition devoted to the gowns of the Comtesse Greffule. Here she is wearing a gown by Worth, and there were also many by Fortuny, all the greatest designers. She was the reigning beauty queen of Paris society, and she was also among the most influential women in the aristocracy in the history of the arts of the 20th century because of her behind-the-scenes influence. Born Elisabeth de Caraman-Chimay, the daughter of a Belgian diplomat father and a pianist mother, she was artistically inclined from a young age, and she spent much of her early life in the public eye, attending diplomatic social functions with her father. At age 18, she wed the wealthy Henri Greffule. The Count disparaged his wife's artistic interests, but she was too restive to just sit docile, and she ignored his demands that she adhere to the rigid social codes that kept women at home. So, to begin with, in her palatial home, she established a salon, surrounded herself with the most brilliant and talented representatives of the worlds of music, art, literature, and politics. Always exquisitely dressed, she played on her physical allure, intelligence, and haughtiness to carve out a prominent place within society. Working constantly to improve her general culture, she studied photography with Nadar and contemporary literature with her cousin Robert de Montesquieu, who we saw depicted in Sandy's slideshow. In 1890, in defiance of her husband, Madame Greffule founded a new musical organization, the Société des Grandes Auditions Musicales de France. The audacity came from the fact that this was a public organization, and its performances took place in major concert venues. Under the auspices of the Société, Paris performances, including many first performances of works by Handel, Wagner, and Berlioz, were presented. In 1906 came the fateful meeting. Madame Greffule was presented to Serge Diaghilev, who was looking to present an exhibition of Russian portraits. With the Comtesse's help, this portrait exhibition took place, attracting throngs who came to see the exotic Russian art. And with the further support of the Comtesse Greffule, Diaghilev was able, in 1909, to establish the celebrated Ballet Russe, which changed the direction of the arts, the modern arts in Europe, forever. In the Ballet Russe, Diaghilev united the talents of choreographer Fokine, dancers including Nijinsky and Ida Rubinstein, set designers Alexandre Benoit and Léon Bakst, and a whole host of composers, including, but not limited to, Debussy and the scandalous Afternoon of a Faun, Ravel, and especially Stravinsky, whose even more scandalous Rite of Spring shocked audiences and brought music definitively into the 20th century. So I'm really sprinting through this subject, but the last salon hostess about whom I wish to speak is just as Sandy has her Romaine, I have my Winnaretta, better known as the Princesse Edmond de Polignac. Now, take a good look at that face. She is the daughter of the sewing machine industrialist Isaac Singer, Singer sewing machine, and Paris-born Isabelle Boyer, who, according to legend, was possibly the model for Bartholdi's Statue of Liberty. Now, I can't see that resemblance in Isabella's face, but look at that face, those sort of granite-like square features, and you really can see the Statue of Liberty, in my humble opinion. Isaac Singer's first career had been that of an itinerant actor, but it was his improvement of the mechanism of Elias Howe's sewing machine that made him his colossal fortune. In the period before taxes, he was a multimillionaire many times over. Before marrying Winnaretta's mother, Singer had been a real ladies' man. In all, he fathered 24 children, all of whom inherited substantial fortunes after his death. Winnaretta was child number 20 and a millionaire at the age of 11 after her father's death. After the widow Singer remarried, the family moved to Paris, where Winnaretta received training as both a pianist and organist and also as a painter. She studied with respectable, noted painters from the Academy, and her paintings were accomplished enough to be accepted in the Académie des Beaux-Arts Spring Salon for 4 years in a row when she was in her early 20s. Her hero was Manet, who at the time was considered still to be a crackpot. And late in life, Winnaretta was amused to see one of her own canvases being sold in a local gallery as a Manet. However, Winnaretta's greatest passion was music. She too defied social mores for a young woman, and she began to frequent the circles of the musical avant-garde as well as the artistic avant-garde. In order to get out of her mother's house, where she felt stifled, she married young to a Prince Louis de Sey-Montbéliard, but the union was unhappy as Winnaretta came to terms with her own lesbianism. There's a great story. This poor guy that she married, this prince, I think he was just expecting a conventional marriage, walked into the marriage bedroom that night, found his new bride on top of a large wardrobe, brandishing an umbrella and shouting, "If you touch me, I'll kill you." Needless to say, the marriage was not happy and it did not last. A second marriage, intended to be a marriage of convenience, was cynically engineered by Elisabeth Grefful and her cousin, Robert de Montesquieu. This time, the intended groom was Prince Edmond de Polignac, 30 years Winnaretta's elder, a talented composer, and a gay man. So this was supposed to be a mariage blanc, no sexual component. She'd get the title, he'd get the money. But to everybody's surprise, this blossomed into a true love match. And I have read the love letters. This is as deep a love as has ever existed, but no sex. In place of sex, they had a salon. It was the symbol of their deep emotional bond. Here we have Winnaretta with her nice little wasp waist, Edmond de Polignac in the middle, and to the right we have Robert de Montesquieu looking with a little smirk over the couple, but he was thwarted when they actually fell in love. Winnaretta, these slides were out of order, but it doesn't matter. She decorated her home with the works of famous painters. She had many Monets, which are now in the Musée d'Orsay. She had La Lecture of Manet, which is a portrait of Madame Manet in a white dress sitting on a white couch. And in 1912, she commissioned the Catalan artist José Maria Sert to decorate the salon with these frescoes, and you can say women and monkey-like creatures cavorting. Here's a gathering of friends. Top left is Edmond de Polignac, the young man with the mustache, 3 people in, that's Marcel Proust, who wrote about the Polignacs in his newspaper articles. Winnaretta is dead center. To her right, to your right, is Anna de Noailles, and on the bottom, Anna's sister and the pianist Edouard Brisler. The Polignac Salon became the place to have your works presented if you were a young composer. Young composers vied to have their works performed there in a salon that comfortably seated 200. You know, a room maybe half the size of this one, you know, a little tightly packed, but 200 people. And this was not unusual. For those music lovers, everybody had their music salon, and these were the sizes of small concert halls. After 7 blissful years of marriage, Edmond de Polignac died, and Winnaretta consecrated the rest of her life to honoring her husband's memory by commissioning new works by unknown or underappreciated composers. For the next 30 years, she solicited 24 salon-size works from composers as diverse as Igor Stravinsky, Erik Satie, Manuel de Falla, Francis Poulenc, and Kurt Weill, to name but a few, most of whom had their works, these commissioned works, given their first performances in the salon. During her lifetime, she became known as La Grande Mécène, the great patron. And nearly all the works that she commissioned are considered today to be masterworks and are in the active repertory. 2 of Winnaretta's artistic preferences, a love of the music of J.S. Bach and her fascination with Hellenic language and culture, led directly to the rise of what is broadly called neoclassicism in music. Additionally, Winnaretta's desire to subvention a new genre, music for a small space, in her case, small being a relative term, but in any event, music to be performed in intimate, non-public surroundings, influenced both the scope and the substance of the scores. And to pick up on something that Sandy discussed in her talk, it can be argued that there is a parallel between the notion of the music salon and the homosexual closet. In an era predating gay identity, after all a 20th century construct, the music salon was a place where homosexuals and lesbians could interact in sensually pleasing and socially acceptable circumstances. Winnaretta's salon/closet was not a confined or confining interior space. Rather, it was a haven, a warm, opulent studio with all the creative and experimental connotations associated with that word. Her salon offered a comfort zone not only to her, but to her other homosexual friends in her milieu. Now, I've talked mostly about Winnaretta's role as a music patron, but she also supported modern artists. And to wrap this up, I just want to bring this back to Romaine Brooks. Winnaretta and Romaine met around 1905, just before Brooks's move from London to Paris. And she lived right down the same street as Winnaretta, just a few blocks away from the Polignac mansion. Soon thereafter, Winnaretta commissioned Brooks to paint the portrait, this famous missing portrait to which Sandy alluded. And here we come up against a curious paradox, you know, the exigencies of making a living versus the desire to maintain your artistic ideal. Winnaretta was indeed an ardent champion of modern art, but she was also a very powerful influence. And if you got on her bad side, you were toast. So she had rather formidable features. She had TMJ, her jaw was down here, her mouth was an upside down U, she talked through her teeth. She was scary looking. And what is a portrait artist to do? Now, to be fair to her, she executed a number of self-portraits, and I'm going to show you these one after another, and we can see that true to modernist practice, she painted herself, warts and all. Here is her earliest self-portrait, executed when she was 17. Can't see it very well, but you can see that sort of defiant look in her eye. All right, she's not trying to make herself look pretty. She looks cold and defiant. Here's the next one. This is a little more cheerful. All right? All right, I mean, there's a little bit of impressionism, but again, you can see that she's not trying to make herself look pretty. The colors are cheerful, but look at her face. It's you know, a little suspicious looking. All right? Who are you to interrupt me during my reading hour? And here is a later self-portrait where there she is looking really scary, and she makes no bones about it. She embraces her scariness. She's happy with what she actually looks like. She has no fear about depicting that. But the artists who depicted her wanted to stay on her good side. So here we have a portrait by John Singer Sargent. In every way, a lesser work by, frankly, my favorite artist, because usually Sargent just finds this, you know, special spark in everybody's face, but here you can see he's really trying to make her look toned down. There's no other way to put it. We can see the Aubusson rug, and he accentuates, you know, her fur and her opulent dress and her wealth. But the face is remarkably devoid of character, which is what his portraits are all about. And now we get to Romaine's missing portrait. This is a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy, hence the lines. But what Romaine has done, she breaks with her signature style, and she softens Winnaretta's features. We see her posed in a conventional profile, wearing a simple white flowing dress, with the shoulder crossing her body, surely an evocation of an ancient Greek warrior woman. But the power of the Amazonian image is undermined, however, by the rendering of Winnaretta's face. The hooked nose and grim mouth have been softened. Her angularity and her complicated allure and this steeliness that she possesses have all been but eradicated. So in a way, this is one of the least modern of Romaine's portraits, in my opinion, despite the inveterate modernity of her subject. But as a career gambit, it was a huge success. Winnaretta was apparently pleased with the work and introduced Romaine to all of her friends. Romaine became the darling of a coterie of titled and moneyed women, whom Romaine did not understand at all, but all of these women clamored to have their portraits painted by her. And the newspapers got into the act. They chronicled the unveiling of these new canvases, as well as the numerous dinners, tea parties, and gatherings held at Romaine's house. So to conclude, you know, I began with a juxtaposition of images of the automobile and the horse-drawn carriage. In the early 20th century, the concept of modernity was just taking hold for the high society women who very gingerly began to push against the boundaries of what was possible in their social milieu. Romaine went much further than this. But she found a way, by softening her stance as she needed to, despite her nonconformity, to find her place in the surroundings of high society. Who knows how much further she could have gone if the strictures upon her subjects had been just a little looser. Thank you.